Coming up on this episode, Josh Giddey gets his money with the new 4-year, $100 million contract with the Chicago Bulls. So what does it mean for Jonathan Kuminga and the Golden State Warriors as their free agency stalemate continues? Welcome back to the Golden State with Mates podcast on what is a Wednesday morning here for me in Australia. I had my first game of Social League basketball back after about 6 weeks last night, and my goodness, was it horrific. I was absolutely terrible. Hadn't touched a basketball in 6 weeks, so my coordination was just all off. And then by the fourth quarter, my body kind of started breaking down on me. I'm getting too old now at 28. My prime was about 10 years ago, probably. And there was a play. I got the ball in transition on a fast break, and I had an opportunity one-on-one against a guy that was much smaller than me. And I think I would have probably scored in that situation at least 8 times out of 10, probably. And as I went kind of into a Euro layup, both my calves just started cramping up, and I almost literally fell over before I even threw the ball up. And I ended up throwing the ball up towards the rim, and it missed. It was just an absolute nightmare. Hopefully, as they say, better for the run going into next week, but we got absolutely smashed. So a bit of a disaster there, but it is what it is, a little bit of fun at the end of the day. Let's get into this episode where Josh Giddey, I've just woken up to Josh Giddey signing a 4-year, $100 million contract with the Chicago Bulls, obviously taking another notable restricted free agent off the board, probably the most notable restricted free agent alongside Jonathan Kuminga. Obviously, we had Cam Thomas signing his $6 million qualifying offer with the Brooklyn Nets last week. First of all, as an Australian, I just want to congratulate Josh Giddey. Like, this is a notable thing. Australian athletes don't regularly get this type of money. We obviously saw Ben Simmons previously with the Philadelphia 76ers get a 5-year, $177 million extension of his rookie contract. Hopefully this deal can work out better for Josh, or he can live up to this deal a little bit better than what Ben did, obviously. But as an Australian, super proud of Josh, and will continue to follow his career at the Bulls moving forward. And of course, with the national team, he shows great pride in representing the Boomers at international level. So looking forward to continuing to watch his career develop and hopefully make the improvements that he needs to. But from a Warrior perspective, what kind of impact does this have on Jonathan Kuminga and his restricted free agency, obviously? I think it should put a little bit of pressure on both sides of the equation, to be honest, on both Golden State and Kuminga. I think this Giddey deal is perfect, and it took over 2 months into free agency to obviously get to this point. But I think this is what restricted free agency should be about. It's the team having some leverage so the player just can't go out. But there also has to be some goodwill from the team in negotiating and compromising a little bit. And all the reports we'd heard up until this point were that Giddey wanted 4 years at about $30 million, so $120 million over the life of the contract, and that the Bulls were only offering 4 years, $80, $20 million annually. So it makes sense. Like, this is the obvious compromise. 4 years, 25, both sides meet in the middle and they get this 4-year, $100 million contract done. So well done to both sides. And it's not usually the case that I would say well done to the Chicago Bulls on a roster move or a contract move. I don't think they have been great when it comes to roster building over recent years. And I don't want to say that they are the blueprint for what the Warriors should be doing, because it's the Chicago Bulls at the end of the day. But I do think the Warriors should take what the Bulls have done here and take a page out of their book and actually come to some kind of compromise with Jonathan Kuminga, rather than all the reports we've been getting is that Golden State have been incredibly rigid and hard line on just simply offering Kuminga this 2-year, $45 million contract offer that comes with a second-year team option. And Kuminga obviously wants the player option. There needs to be some kind of compromise here. We need some level of movement that at least gives JK a carrot or some incentive to actually sign a contract with the Warriors and avoid the disaster that would be the qualifying offer. So what does that look like? I've said all along, like, guarantee the 2 years, no team option, no player option, and no trade clause either. So in that scenario, I think Kuminga gets his $45 million guaranteed. And I still think, as I've said all along, and I know I'm repeating myself here, but if the Warriors guarantee that second year, I don't think that eliminates too much of the trade value. And I suppose the Warriors are looking at this and saying, well, if we're looking to trade him, then it would be great to be able to trade him to a team that might not even want Jonathan Kuminga, but might want him to be getting off other salary that we actually potentially want, because we see whatever player that is as a fit for our franchise, and therefore that team could take on what is an expiring contract and could decline the team option in year two. I just don't think that is the case. I think anyone that wants Jonathan Kuminga, he's 22 years old at the end of the day. You want him as part of your future. I just don't see a way in which a team trades for Jonathan Kuminga as an expiring contract just to get off money. Right. And then obviously the Warriors have to find the balance of taking back a player that they want, that they don't necessarily view as a bad contract, even if their current team does. That's a bit of a complicated situation if you're kind of trying to make sense of what I'm saying here. I just don't think that there is much of a chance in the Warriors or another rival team declining the second-year team option on Jonathan Kuminga, and therefore just guarantee it. I know you get a little bit of extra optionality by having the team option. Just guarantee it. See what Kuminga says then, right? Offer that incentive of like, okay, yes, we will give you $45 million of guaranteed money. Then it's on him, because it's a lot more difficult to turn down $45 million to take the $7.9 million qualifying offer than it is half that, if that's only what you're guaranteeing and you're continuing to demand that the second year is a team option. So I'm a little bit frustrated that there hasn't been some movement on that, and that the Warriors, by the reports, like, we haven't heard anything beyond the current offer of 2 years, 45 with a second year team option. It also puts the pressure on JK and his camp a little bit as well. It's like, okay, Giddey's got his deal done now. Like, we need to make a decision here. And I think Dalton Johnson had a tweet a couple of hours ago as well. It said, hey, like, and I spoke about this a couple of episodes ago as well, like, guys are coming back into the gym now, into the practice facilities. Like, you've got to sort something out here. Yes, there's the October 1 deadline for when Kuminga can take the qualifying offer or not, and he has to decide by that date. But ideally, from a team standpoint and as the Warriors, like, you want to have the team settled. You want to know what the roster looks like well before October. Like, obviously, ideally, it would be right now. Ideally, it would have been a month ago, right? But you at least, like, you want something done in the next week, surely. So I think this should apply a little bit more pressure to the Warriors and Kuminga to get something done in the next week here. Will it actually, in reality? Maybe not. Maybe Kuminga is just like, both sides have dug their heels in so far that it's impossible to get out of. And the Warriors are continuing with their stance. Kuminga's continuing with his stance, which is, if you don't change your contract offer, I'm just going to take the qualifying offer. Now, at what point does he do that? Does he wait all the way up until the final few days before the October 1 deadline? Potentially. I'm not sure if there's a motive for him to sign the qualifying offer before then. I think if I was him, I would just wait it out until October 1, really, if I was him, which again puts some pressure on the Warriors. It's like, hey, we've got so many things to do after that as well. And yes, they might be lined up, but things can still change, right? And what happens with Al Horford, D'Anthony Melton, Gary Payton II, Seth Curry, Malcolm Brogdon, Will Richard, all these kind of combination of players that we could see on the roster after the Kuminga situation is resolved. Like, it all needs to be hashed out. It all will take still 2 to 3 days, you'd imagine, to kind of work out what the contract's going to look like. Obviously, the Warriors are going to have some kind of priority in place in terms of, like, what the dominoes are after Kuminga. So once Kuminga is done, it's Horford first, then it's Melton, you'd imagine. Then by the sounds of it, it's GP2. That gets you to 13 players, assuming Kuminga is actually still on the roster. So who knows here, right? Who knows? But I think it does put a little bit, it should, I'm not saying it will, but it should put a little bit of pressure on the Warriors and Kuminga to get something done here in the next week, rather than waiting right up until October 1. And what is training camp? Like, seriously, let's get something done. The other thing that I want to get into here is in relation to the Bulls and Jonathan Kuminga, because we saw Jake Fisher report a couple of months ago now, right back towards the early middle part of July that Kuminga's camp had been angling for a way to get both him and Giddey paid in Chicago. And I think that was always going to be complicated while the Giddey negotiations and while his future remain up in the air. That was always going to be difficult to make happen. Now that Giddey's locked in 4-year, $100 million contract, does Chicago revisit the possibility of looking at a sign and trade for Jonathan Kuminga, given we know they've had some interest, right? They had interest earlier in free agency. They've had interest dating back to, I think, when the Warriors had some interest in Alex Caruso, going back to not the midseason deadline we just saw, but the 2024 midseason deadline, which is 18 months ago now. So they have had some interest in Jonathan Kuminga. Do they re-emerge as a potential suitor for Kuminga? I'm not exactly sure. I want to say I don't think so, because if I was Chicago and I had interest, and I'm looking at this from a Bulls perspective, I'm taking my Warrior hat off, I'm looking at this from a Chicago perspective. If I had legitimate interest in Jonathan Kuminga, I would be pushing for him to take the qualifying offer with the Warriors. That then could allow them to potentially trade for Kuminga mid-season and not have to give up much in the way of contracts. Obviously, probably not have to give up too much in the way of draft capital or any value at all, because on the qualifying offer, the Warriors are going to have very, very little leverage. That's the other thing about the qualifying offer. Like, yes, you could still try and get a trade done, but Kuminga would have to agree to the trade, right? And then there's the threat of him just walking for nothing as an unrestricted free agent next offseason. That's why it's a disaster if Kuminga signs the qualifying offer. So if I'm Chicago, I'm pushing for Kuminga to sign the qualifying offer and either getting him on the absolute cheap via trade mid-season, or where Kuminga would, I'm sure, be accepting of going to Chicago and getting out of Golden State and removing the no trade clause in that scenario. Or just saying to him, hey, we're going to have over $80 million, or sorry, not over $80 million. They've got over $80 million in expiring contracts. We are going to have significant cap space next offseason where you can be an unrestricted free agent if you take the qualifying offer. And at this point, we are willing to offer you said amount next offseason. Now, I'm not sure if there's any kind of tampering rules coming in, and I'm sure teams are probably going to be a little bit careful in regards to that when with all the Kawhi Leonard situation going on at the moment. But there's no doubt, like, I'm sure Chicago can just say to Kuminga's agent, hey, we have interest. We don't want to give up too much in the way of contracts or anything of value that the Warriors might want in a sign and trade right now. But get him to take the qualifying offer, and we will have a deal lined up for him next offseason. Or we will try and actually get him before that in a trade where the Warriors don't really have much leverage because there's the threat of him walking anyway and that he's got a no trade clause as well. So that's what I would do if I'm Chicago, right? That's what I would do. However, if you're the Warriors, there's actually really no issue. There's no concern with Chicago showing some interest in Kuminga. I think it would be a good thing, unless obviously they do try and push him to take the qualifying offer. Obviously, that would be a bad thing. But if they show legitimate sign and trade interest in him right now, that's a good thing for the Warriors, because right now they should want to have as many different options on the table as they can. Like, they don't want to be forced into one certain thing. They should want to, like, this idea that they've started, they've stopped listening to sign and trade offers. I wouldn't stop listening to sign and trade offers. I'd still hold him in, reasonable value, right, and not accept the kind of Dario Saric, Devin Carter, and 2 second-round pick deals that we heard earlier in free agency. Like, I'm not accepting that. I'm not accepting necessarily Royce O'Neal, Nick Richards in a couple of seconds. Like, I'm still holding him in value, but you are listening. You are trying to get this guy on a contract to trade him mid-season anyway. So why would you stop listening to sign and trade offers this offseason? And if Chicago come to you and say, hey, here's an offer, like, you've got to listen to that. I'm not saying you have to accept it. I'm not sure what it will necessarily look like. But if Chicago renew interest, that's a good thing for the Warriors, because they might actually present something different that you could do, something that you might find of value. Again, I think that might be unlikely, but there's a chance, right? And there's also the possibility that if Chicago renew interest and now you have another team, perhaps Phoenix or Sacramento come back to you with an increased offer, because they see Chicago as not only a team that's interested in Kuminga right now, but also as a team that could have interest in Kuminga and would have the space to sign Kuminga next offseason. So if Phoenix or Sacramento really, really want Jonathan Kuminga and hold him in high regard and want to have him on their team, then this is the time they've got to do it, really, because they're not going to be able to necessarily match what Chicago could potentially offer Kuminga as an unrestricted free agent next offseason if they are, if Kuminga does go down the qualifying offer path. So that's going to be the fascinating thing to me. Will Chicago renew interest here now that Giddey's locked in to his 4-year, $100 million contract? I'm not saying they will, but it is something to monitor because it could give the Warriors a little bit more optionality. What would a deal potentially look like here from Chicago? Again, I think there's a more likely chance that they don't show interest in Kuminga and they say, we'll just leave that to percolate in Golden State. We'll just see what happens there. We're going to hold off. We're going to retain our flexibility for next offseason. We're going to retain our $80+ million in expiring contracts. We are going to have a heap of cap space next offseason. And if Kuminga is an unrestricted free agent next offseason and we still have interest in him then we can explore what that would look like in terms of just a free agent deal for him next offseason. So that's what I think Chicago will do if they actually renew interest now and say, no, we want to get a sign and trade done this offseason in the next couple of weeks, right? What does that look like from a Golden State perspective? There's a few players, obviously. Nikola Vucevic is someone that I've spoken about plenty of times on this podcast and has been linked to Golden State plenty, dating back to before the mid-season deadline. Obviously, with Al Horford coming in, the need for Nikola Vucevic is just not there, particularly when he's making $21.5 million or whatever it is, or $22 million, whatever it is, on his expiring contract this season. Like, I don't think the Warriors... I think if the Warriors wanted to make that trade and get Vucevic for Kuminga, I think they could have done it already, right? I think they probably could have pulled a sign and trade off already. I don't think they're going to have interest in Nikola Vucevic. And even though they're inching closer to a potential disaster in terms of the qualifying offer, I still don't see them moving in a direction that says, yeah, we'll take Nikola Vucevic for Jonathan Kuminga. Like, that just doesn't make much sense. Giving up an athletic forward that's 22 years old, who's still highly talented, who is very productive in terms of at least scoring the ball when he's on the floor. I don't think you're giving that up for a 35-year-old who, yes, had a very good year last season, but there's still question marks on his ability to impact winning. I think he's only been in the playoffs once in his 15, 16-year career or whatever, once or twice. Like, his teams don't get to the playoffs. And just like the contract, like, we're getting Al Horford in. If you didn't have Al Horford coming in, then sure, yeah, Vucevic, there is a need there for a starting center, so maybe he becomes a legitimate option. But without Horford, like Vucevic, if he suddenly gets bought out, which we've heard is not going to happen, at least for the moment, if he was to get bought out mid-season, he's available on a minimum contract, sure, no worries. I don't have an issue with the Warriors renewing interest in Vucevic, but I just don't think that's going to happen as part of a trade at all, regardless of whether it's with Kuminga or anyone else. Like, I just don't see the Warriors trading for Nikola Vucevic. Simple. Coby White is obviously the player that many Warrior fans looked at, and including myself, back towards the start of free agency when we heard a little bit about the interest that Chicago may have had in Jonathan Kuminga. I've cooled on Coby White for multiple reasons. First of all, the Warriors look like they're signing a heap of guards in free agency. So they've got Melton coming in. They're going to re-sign GP2 by the sounds of it. And then whatever they do with the last one or two roster spots, it's going to be some version of Malcolm Brogdon, Seth Curry, and Will Richard by the sound of it. So, and they're all guards. So do they need another guard? Technically, they need another point guard and another guy who can handle the ball a bit and create a bit for you, which Coby White can do. But I'd probably just prefer Malcolm Brogdon on a minimum contract if that's kind of what you think you need on your roster. So I have cooled on Coby White from that perspective. And I've also, it just doesn't make much sense from a long-term fit. Is Coby White a reasonable short-term play to get a hit of offense next season as a guy? Like, you still need, particularly if you're going to trade Kuminga, you need a guy who can be a third scorer, third creator, third ball handler for you beyond Steph and Jimmy. We know those guys are going to rest plenty throughout the regular season. Then Coby White would be really helpful for the Warriors in the short term. But he's really helpful and he's really valuable when he's making $12.9 million or whatever on the final year of his deal. What happens when all of a sudden next offseason he's asking for $30 million, which according to Mark Stein on the Stein line yesterday, he reported that the Bulls in their negotiations with Giddey are actually preparing for Kobe White to ask for a very similar deal that would be at least 25, if not over $30 million per season. Are the Warriors going to be willing to pay Kobe White $30 million a season? I don't think so. Right? I don't think so. You're paying Steph Curry, Jimmy Butler, and Draymond Green already, albeit you've only got 2 years left for each of those guys. But Steph, we've got to remember, like, I think even beyond this current contract, Steph's still going to get, unless he wants to do the Warriors a real favor and take a massive discount. Like, I think he's still going to be good enough to be getting like a max or near a max, or at least like $50 million plus, right? So there's Steph Curry getting $50 plus million beyond 2027. Then you've got Brandon Bajemski, who's going to be extension eligible off his rookie contract next year, next off season. And then also become, well, that would kick in if there's an extension done, that would kick in the 2027-28 season. The way that Pods has produced for the Warriors over his first 2 years and his development track, I suppose, would suggest that come next off season, if he continues doing what he's doing, he could easily ask for $20 plus million, around 20 plus, depending, it could be more than that if he has a really good third year. So are you going to be wanting to pay Steph Curry, let's say at least $50 million, and Brandon Bajemski and Kobe White $50 million combined? No, like you're not going to pay $100 million for 3 guards. I mean, the Warriors, I suppose, did it with Steph, Clay, and Chris Paul a couple of years ago, where they paid like over 120 for 3 guards, but that was more so they did that for 1 year to avoid having to pay Jordan Poole for 4 years and have 3 guards locked up there as well. So I just don't see the Warriors wanting to pay Kobe White long term, and therefore, are you going to be willing to trade Kuminga for a guy that you probably acknowledge is only going to be on your team for 1 year? I don't think so. Like, I don't. If the Warriors say we're not going to be able to pay him 25 plus, 30 plus million dollars per year and also pay Pods, like, is it really worth having 1 year of Kobe White? I don't think so. I think he'd be helpful, but I don't think he's an absolute necessity. I think having Malcolm Brogdon would be probably better value maybe for you in terms of getting him on a minimum contract and having a veteran guy there and a guy who might want to get paid next off season, but you're not giving up Jonathan Kuminga to get him, right? He's just a free agent signing. As Kobe White, you'd be giving up Jonathan Kuminga, and this is saying that the Bulls would even be open to trading Kobe White. I'm not saying they'd even be open to that, but if they were, like, I'm not sure the Warriors would have the interest in Kobe White like fans necessarily would, who just see the player, and the player's he's a good player. Right, and he'd be helpful for the Warriors, but again, helpful in the short term, and then he'd become far less valuable if he's suddenly on a 25 or 30 plus million dollar per year contract. Right, another guy like Io Dosunmu, I don't know. I don't think the Warriors necessarily have interest in him. The Bulls do have plenty of picks, so is it like Dosunmu and draft capital? I could see that as the most realistic, right? I could see the Bulls trying to, but then Dosunmu's not making much. So how do the Bulls fit Kuminga's contract in and only send Dosunmu out? Like, they'd have to add something else. And I think it's just still probably too complicated for something to happen this offseason, which again is why, if I'm Chicago, like, why do I need to trade for Kuminga now when really I could just try and push him into taking the qualifying offer? And if I still had interest next offseason, I could go get him as an unrestricted free agent or trade for him midseason when he's on a $7.9 million contract. And I'm sure, again, that he'd be willing to lift his no-trade clause to head to Chicago in that scenario, particularly given they have cap space, and there'd be an assurance, I'm sure, that they would pay him next offseason. Anyway, guys, I'm going to finish it up there. Let me know what you think of the Josh Giddey extension and what you make of its potential impact on Jonathan Kuminga and the Warriors. I'm still holding out hope here that we see something in the next week. Could be closer to the October 1 deadline, but who knows? If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel already, that would be greatly appreciating. Follow me at POC252. That's POK252 on X/Twitter. Thanks to those of you that are listening on your podcast feed as well, and I'll see you on the next episode.